Hey guys, welcome to part 2 of my Serpent 750 build. I hope you enjoyed part 1 and found some useful tips in there. In this part I'm going to show you a couple of things with greasing your CVDs to doing your wiring and your servos. Don't forget to like and subscribe my channel to keep up to date with my videos, and hope you enjoy it and we can hit the track soon. Cheers! So, CVD assembly. You want to ensure, as we showed in part 1, to clean all your metal parts with some brake clean or metho. This is just to get rid of any oil or residue so your grease can actually stick to the metal parts that you want it to stick to. So what I like to do is use some high quality bearing grease and push it through the middle of the CVD, and you want to make sure that you coat all the areas that are going to be moving and sliding. And then I like to wipe the excess off in the out drive and use the little bit of grease that's left on your fingers to cover the center pin, and then squeeze that grease back in those joints. Again, just wipe around on the out drive to cover it, and then I squeeze the grease again through that pin just to give it a nice little coating. And slide that through, and then give it a good little move around, ensuring that the grease is covered in all areas. Give her a wipe and she's ready for assembly. As mentioned in part 1, suspension movement and freeness is really crucial. So the pillow balls make up a lot of that movement. You want to make sure that they're not too tight and not too loose. So I'm just going to show you here, we thread in our plastic adjustment nut. I like to tighten it up so it pushes the pillow ball into position right at the end so you can't move it, and then just keep backing it off until you get that free movement with little to no play, but it should still fall under its own weight. Sometimes you can put a little bit of grease or oil on that pillow ball to make it a little bit more free, but generally not necessary. So you just want to make sure you don't have any end play and it falls under its own weight. The wiring on your model is very subjective and you can do it multiple ways. This is the way that I've done mine, running the battery wire behind the tank. One big important thing is you want to make sure the tank still has a lot of room to move it, that no wires are going to touch or rub or wear through. It's crucial. So I run my power lead from the battery through the top of the servos, and I'm going to plug it into the extension lead out of the receiver in the box using one of the Exceed nice little neat extension leads. You can see now that I've installed the receivers and plugged the servos in. Always try to lay your transponder flat. I like to mount mine in the box, it's just neater that way. And we've got our extension lead that I've glued and cut a little slot for the power lead, and that just all sits in nicely. You want to make sure that nothing is grabbing or pinching in the wires. You can see my servo lead being black is okay because it's polarized with a little Futaba style plug, and it just slips in and out nice and easily. So we've got my max power here that I'm going to use to install into my 750. The engine mounts are loosely bolted on. You want to make sure that the engine mounts bolt on squarely. So you can see there that we've got a little bit of slop in the mounts, so they can be put on crooked. But it's important to have them nice and square, so when it sits in the car it's also square to the bottom screws. So I like to just nip them up while squeezing them together on the engine, and get my verniers or ruler and measure the front to the back to make sure that they are indeed square to the motor. Generally speaking, once you've set up the mesh, I always like to take my motor out from the top screws and leave the mounts on the chassis. Just keeps the flex nice. So it's important when you bolt the bottom screws in that you align your spurs and pinions correctly. Take into consideration the end play of the clutch, so it will come out further. once you've got a nice mesh and the engine's square, just to tighten up the diagonal bolts underneath so you can still have a little bit of movement, but you just want to check that that mesh is perfect. So it should spin freely, nicely, with a little bit of backlash. Not too much, but enough that it's not going to bind and get hot. So that amount there for me is perfect. And again, just make sure your engine's square in the car. That's really important for longevity and not to wear out your spurs or pinions. And just make sure that you use a little bit of Loctite on these screws also, and tighten them up evenly, diagonally if you can. And just check after you've tightened up that nothing's moved and that your mesh is still perfect. When setting up your throttle linkage, it's important that the throttle, you have a bit of a gap on neutral, and when you open the full throttle, you still have some movement left in the carburetor. This saves the servo from overloading. So as you can see here, we're on 58% on our radio. If I wind this back down to 50, you'll see just how much less throttle we get. And you can tell there that the carb is not completely open. So we can readjust that to the max, which is so the carb is completely open and you still have some movement left, so you're not putting undue load on your throttle servo. So we still have a bit of gap there. With the brake side, on max brake, you shouldn't bottom out the throttle return spring. So you should still be able to move the throttle on full brake. You can see here that the spring isn't bottomed out and there's still some movement left. So steering linkage setup. First thing you want to make sure when you're building is that your turnbuckles are exactly the same length left to right. This will make setting up your steering a lot easier. I can show you here that my servo horn is just a little bit forward from being at 90 degrees, and my throttle horn there, you can see the setup that we have. So when I'm setting up the steering, I want to get max lock on my endpoints. They can be out a couple of percent, but the way I check this is to go full lock on the radio and then make sure that I still have a little bit of slop on the steering. That way I know that I'm not bottoming out the servo and causing undue battery life and heat in the actual servo itself. When you're setting all this up, you want to make sure your linkages are nice and straight, so you can see the linkage between the servo horn and the servo saver is pretty straight. And I always like to adjust this turnbuckle to get the correct trim, so I try not to use too much trim on the radio and use that to adjust the trim. So here we have my completed 750, all built and looking fresh. So we're going to do a quick initial setup, and the first things you want to check are your pillow ball lengths. So you want to adjust your track width, but at the same time ensure that it's exactly the same from side to side. If you set this up and take the time initially the first time, it makes it easier for adjustment in the future. I'm going to chuck my wheel back on. I like to use setup tyres, so I just have some here set at 62, 64. And then I'm just going to check the ride height. So that's obviously depends on track and your other setups. So the first thing that I'm going to do is ride height. Then I'm going to check my geometry. So I'm going to set my toe and my cambers on the setup gauge. After that, we're going to do droop. And at the end, we're going to check the tweak. Hope you guys have enjoyed the videos and take note of the notes here. See you on the track.